Thank you, Madam Speaker, and it's indeed an honor for me to be rising today as the Shadow Minister of National Defence for the official opposition, the Conservative Party, and also as someone who's incredibly proud of my Ukrainian heritage. I have to say at the outset that I want to make sure everybody understands that Conservatives support Ukraine. We denounce Russia's invasion in Ukraine, that Putin has committed and allowed his military to commit war atrocities and war crimes against the innocent people of Ukraine. And because of that, we support the Canada-Ukraine Strategic Security Partnership, which will enhance the cooperation between Canada and Ukraine, between the Canadian Armed Forces and the Armed Forces of Ukraine. We need to do more, not less, and we believe that this security agreement will set the tone, Madam Speaker. Now, we have spent the last couple of days here in Ottawa paying tribute to the Right Honourable Brian Mulroney, former Prime Minister of Canada, who laid in state the last couple of days here in Ottawa. And I want to extend my condolences to Mila, to Caroline, to Ben, to Mark, and to Nicholas. Why Brian Mulroney is so key to tonight's debate is his incredible support for Ukraine. He was the first Western leader on December 2nd, 1991, that recognized Ukraine's independence. And I think it is very important that we honor his legacy and also the incredible work that he did to make that happen. The fall of the wall in Berlin and the end of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics all ended because of the work done by Ronald Reagan, Margaret Thatcher, and Brian Mulroney to apply increasing sanctions on the USSR, to make sure that the Soviets weren't able to fund their war machine and put the Soviets into bankruptcy. And because of their incredible work of reaching across the Atlantic, of making sure they worked as a partnership as Western liberal democracies who shared a common heritage and loved freedom, democracy, and human rights, stood up against that Soviet bear. And today, we find ourselves in a similar situation where the Russian bear is now trying to flex their muscles. They're using their own war machine to invade Ukraine, to commit war crimes, and to undermine the NATO alliance, to undermine all our democracies. They've been feeding out propaganda and misinformation that has only been paled. I think you'd have to go back to Hitler's Nazis and what Goebbels did in making sure that misinformation and propaganda was disseminated not just within to their own citizens, but around the world. And so it is a responsibility of our Western democracies to make sure that people understand that what they see and what they get are actually two different things when you're dealing with the Kremlin and the kleptocrats there and their propaganda. I think it's important at this state and time to also recognize that our friends in Ukraine and our friends in Israel are facing some horrific situations from terrorism, from war crimes, from barbarianism, and we need to make sure that we continue to stand with Ukraine, continue to stand with Israel in their time of need, release all hostages in both Ukraine and in Israel. They're being held by Hamas and are being held, as we know, in Russia. They've kidnapped over 20,000 children. They're brainwashing them and often using them in their military as cannon fodder against their own country. And I think that is deplorable. Now, as a Conservative, I'm proud of our track record of support in Ukraine. It started with Brian Mulroney, and many of us sat in caucus and in government with Stephen Harper. And, we were there for Ukraine in bringing forward Operation Unifier. We were there for Ukraine by supplying them with military equipment as soon as the war in Donbass broke out back in 2014 and the illegal invasion and annexation of Crimea by the Little Green Men, which we all know were Wagner from the Kremlin. And so we were there, providing things like winter kit, night vision goggles, body armor, and just allowing the Ukrainians to be able to modernize. With Operation Unifier, they were able to train up to NATO standards and put them in the position where they are today, that they are able to fight back against what was supposed to be one of the superpowers in the world. Now, Madam Speaker, we have been saying since 2018, when we saw that this war was not ending in Donbass, it wasn't just an insurgency happening in Luhansk and Donetsk. We knew that there was Russian troops on the ground supplying the weapons, supplying the personnel that were carrying on the war and occupying territory in eastern Ukraine. And in 2018, we started to say, let's send over our surplus weapons. There was a cache of weapons that were sitting, collecting dust in Montreal, that were supposed to go to the Kurdish Peshmerga. That never happened. And so we said, let's take those AK-47s, let's take those grenades and grenade launchers, let's take the Carl Gustav anti-tank weapons and give them to the Ukrainian military. That didn't happen until the war broke out in 2022, in February 2022. And at that point in time, we immediately started saying, well, thank you for doing that, but we've got more to do. We have surplus weapons that are being disposed of, like our light armored vehicles, our Coyotes, our Bisons, armored ambulances. Let's supply those to Ukraine. We had surplus Roll 3 medical hospitals that had been bought up for the COVID pandemic that weren't getting used. Never came out of the crates, by the way. There's a dozen of them. Ship them over to help save lives on the front. And, let's send over more munitions. We need to ramp up our production of 155 rounds for the howitzers. And those artillery shells still have not increased in production to this very day, over 2 years since the war started. And just recently, our leader of the Conservative Party called on the government to supply the CRV-7 rockets, 83,000 sitting in Dundurn, Saskatchewan, that are going to be disposed of, sent to the scrap heap. And instead of scrapping them, let's give them to the Ukrainians who can use them to defend themselves and push back the Russian invaders. Now, Madam Speaker, in the last couple of minutes, I just got to say that I do support the Canada-Ukraine Strategic Security Partnership. In particular, I want to talk about Clause 1 and Clause N. Clause 1 is the resilience of energy and other critical infrastructure. And I think it's important to note that in this clause, they're talking about supporting Ukraine's overall energy sector. And that means liquefied natural gas, which is the main source of fuel for their electricity. It's the main source of fuel for their heating. It's their main source of fuel to drive their economy. And it's been us as Conservatives, and my colleague from Wellington Halton Hills as our Shadow Minister for Foreign Affairs has clearly stated that the way that we stop putting fuel in Russia's war machine, the way we take cash out of the pocket of Putin and his kleptocrats in the Kremlin, is by taking away their market and ability to sell their energy products in Europe. And so we need more Canadian energy. There's also a focus on nuclear safety, and that's one thing Canada actually can do. We can do small nuclear reactors. We can actually help them do modernization of the nuclear infrastructure that they have there, the power plants, Madam Speaker. And I think that we need to capitalize on that, and that will help Ukraine, especially as their nuclear power plants continue to be attacked by Russia. And finally, Madam Speaker, in Clause N, the compensation of losses, injuries, and damages caused by Russian aggression, which is taking Russian assets here in Canada and around the world and use it to directly support Ukraine, Ukrainian families, Ukrainian businesses, rebuild Ukrainian infrastructure, and taking the seizure and the repurposing of Russian sovereign options through compensation mechanisms is going to be a huge step to actually allow us to cover those losses, injuries, and damages suffered from people that lost loved ones. People that faced, that rape was used as a weapon against them. Compensate them for their loss of their homes and their businesses. And I think that this is a great opportunity for us to cooperate on all sides of this House to ensure that Ukraine is able to rebuild after this war ends and that the Russian Federation pays for it.